Welcome. Welcome everyone to the 2022 Global Learning Summit. I'm Pam Delphos, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction's World Language and Global Education Consultant, and I'm so pleased to be with you this afternoon. Welcome to students who are joining us for the afternoon, and welcome back to teachers who may have been with us in the morning. We're so glad you're here. As we begin our time together this afternoon, I'd like to invite everyone to please take just a moment to be physically, mentally, and emotionally present to those here and around the world who are experiencing conflict, injustice, or oppression. During our time today, we are going to be leaning in to how we can improve conditions for ourselves and for others, and how to do that through learning, leadership, and love. Wisconsin is home to 11 federally recognized nations that are comprised of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, Kickapoo, Menominee, Anishinaabe, Oneida, and Mohican people. We acknowledge and honor the ancestral owners and stewards of this land, along with their languages, their cultures, and their ways of knowing and being. We would like to offer a few community agreements as we go into our time together today. Your microphones have been muted, but if you wish to speak, you can raise your virtual hand, or if your camera's on, wave at us and to get our attention, or you can present something in the chat to let us know. We do encourage people to please keep your camera on to feel our sense of community as we share time together this afternoon. The chat is currently controlled so that if you chat, everyone will view your chat, or you can directly chat a host. But direct individual chats will not be possible during our time together today. Please be sure to invite each and every person with whom you're engaging in small group discussions to contribute to the conversation, to share their ideas, their perspectives, if they're comfortable and choose to do so. And listen as you hear others share those things with curiosity and respect. Listen to understand and to learn from one another. We're all going to be committing to being conscious of our impact on others with our words and our behaviors, and just really leaning into embracing what we don't know. We're here today to learn and to be open to new learning. I was very fortunate in planning today's event to have the opportunity to collaborate with the summit planning team of Essie Lunchner, who is Assistant Director of the International and Regional Studies National Resource Center at UW-Madison, and her colleague Sarah Ripp, Assistant Director of Latin American, Caribbean, and Ibero-American Studies Program, and Lori Dennis, who is Assistant Director of the Center for East Asian Studies. You'll have an opportunity to engage with them, except for Essie, who's not able to be with us today, in your breakout rooms. I want to also be sure to give a big shout out to our behind the scenes support people who will be helping me drop links in the chat and address any technical challenges that I or others may have during our time together this afternoon. Sarah Linkert is Assistant Director for the Center for Russia, East Europe, and Central Asia. And John Benchard is Program Assistant at IRIS, and he also is a dual degree graduate student in the La Follette School of Public Affairs and UW-Madison School of Medicine and Public Health. Thank you all for your work in making today work. And now, with no further ado, I want to introduce to you Alexis Kwok. Alexis is a junior who at UW-Madison who will be graduating in the spring of 2023. And her majors include international studies, political science, and Chinese. And if that isn't enough, she's also getting a certificate in educational policy study. Alexis also serves on the UN Food and Agriculture Committee and self-identifies herself as a farm kid from Wisconsin. Please welcome Alexis Kwok.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. I was asked to share a little bit about my global journey and my global learning journey. I figured a good place to start with that would be when I was a freshman, first coming into UW-Madison, all the way back at fall 2019. I came in as an animal science major. Like it says in my bio, I am a farm kid. We had horses somewhere between 3 and 8 at any time. So it made sense for me to go into animal science. I was going to be a large animal vet. I knew the things, I knew the steps. I was so ready and so prepared to go into this field. But then I started my first semester in college and I started taking the classes and I realized that it wasn't really for me. I wasn't enjoying what I was learning, and while I know it's an important field, I felt that my talents would be better used elsewhere. So I went on the major hunt. I took a stop at sociology, I took a stop at psychology, I took a stop in economics, I took a stop in sociology again, and then I found political science. I'd always been interested in politics in the world, so this seemed perfect to me. I was able to learn about other countries, some that I had heard a lot about, some that I hadn't heard a lot about, and be able to synthesize that information in a way that feels useful to me and something that I can do with it. So then as I'm moving along my path in political science, I decided that I want to do something a little different. I want to pick something else up. And so I looked at international studies. In international studies here at UW-Madison, it expands upon just the politics of being international and a global student. In the international studies major, you learn about communications, comparative educations, and most importantly, languages. The international studies major requires 5 semesters of a language to graduate. So as you guys can see, it's Chinese. But at the time, I had no idea what I wanted to pick. So I called my dad, and I should have known his answer long before I even called him, because he's been telling me to pick up Mandarin since I was a kid. And I still called him anyway. He goes, of course you should pick up Mandarin. It's the most spoken language in the world. Why wouldn't you want to speak it? So there I was, with an international studies, political science, and Chinese major, completely unsure what I was going to do with it. So I started career shopping and was kind of confused, not really finding things that I loved or things that I felt that I really meshed with. And then I got my internship with Triple Valley Bean Co. Inc. last summer. Triple Valley Bean is the largest kidney bean processor in the world, shipping more than 70% of their product internationally. In this role, my global learning skyrocketed. I was talking to people from over 40 countries, people at over 100 different companies, learning about their cultures, languages, governments, and how trade works with the United States. This internship sparked my love and my future career path in international learning. I decided that I want to go into trade, customs, and port infrastructure. This will allow me to ensure that United States agriculture is safe and that we are keeping people fed around the globe. So I tell you guys this story so that you know that global learning is not linear. You never know where you're going to end up, and you might have detours and potholes and stops along the way that may discourage you. Don't let it discourage you. The world is a wide place. There is somewhere in international learning that you will find your talents, passions, and personality mesh to find something that you truly think you fit into. So I encourage you to continue on your global learning journey at all times and never stop learning.
Thank you so much, Alexis. I invite everyone to share a comment in the chat or to give an ASL applause to Alexis. Thank you for sharing your journey with us, and you're just getting started. We have many Wisconsin high school students who are considering their own futures with us this afternoon. And I would like to invite any of you who are students to use the chat now to please post a word or phrase or a sentence that communicates your hopes and goals for our time together today. Why are you here on a Saturday? We're so glad that you are, but we'd like to know why so that we can be responsive to your interests and your needs through our time together, because this afternoon is all about you. And we may have some students who are joining us a little later and are not yet here. But if you are a student who's here with us now, please feel free to share your why for why you're here with us today in the chat. I'm seeing there was a delay in being able to access the chat, so that's now been resolved. We welcome you to contribute your why if you're willing to do so now. Thank you. And as we move through our time together today, I'm sure we're going to be discovering even some more whys or expanding upon the why that brought you into this space. We also have several teachers who are here this afternoon, some with and some without students. If you're a teacher who has students who are already here or joining us shortly, please share your name in the chat and the district that you represent. We're grateful to you as educators for working not only with us, but with your students as well today. As those teacher and student reflections are coming into the chat, I also want to take a moment to recognize one of those teachers, Miss Carly Goodkind, our 2021-2022 Global Educator of the Year. Carly is here today with students. She is a German educator at Greenfield High School, and you can see the comments that her colleagues and school leaders shared with us as part of the nomination process. Carly was recently recognized by both the state superintendent and the governor for her work in supporting global learning within and beyond her school community. Congratulations, Carly. I want to be sure that everyone has access to the participant guide this afternoon. If you weren't with us this morning, there's a tiny URL that you can enter into your search bar to access it there, or one of my colleagues will drop the direct link into the chats for you to access it via the chat. This is an overview of the time that we'll be spending together. And in that participant guide, you'll have access to a lot of the links that you're going to be asked to engage through the tools that we'll be using for the rest of the afternoon. One of the links is a global learning resource recommendation document, and that is for you to share resources that you have come to value in your work as global educators, or for you as students. If there's a resource that you value that you've been introduced to within your school community or independently outside of school that you found has helped you to learn more about the world and to engage with the world through it. So a lot of our work is centering around our own development of global competence and how to work with others, colleagues, and our students, our learners, to continue to grow our global competence over time. The Global Scholars Program in Wisconsin is implemented to support the development of these 4 dimensions of global competence. But if you're not currently participating in the Global Scholars Program, these principles are universal. They came to us from Asia Society and are now being implemented within the OECD PISA framework for global competence internationally. So our global scholars and global teachers, global educators, are developing and working toward being able to demonstrate and engage through these areas: knowledge about the world, respect for diverse perspectives, the ability to communicate with others across languages and cultures, and committing to this is the most important part of it. And all the other parts lead us to being able to and willing to take action to improve conditions at home and around the world for our collective well-being. To help us in that work today, we have a phenomenal keynote speaker, our friend to Wisconsin, Jill Warner. Jill is currently Director of Education and Outreach for American Field Service, AFS, and is the formal global learning specialist from the Indiana Department of Education. She serves on Indiana's Global Learning Advisory Council, former educator of Spanish and school administrator, and now a dear friend. Please join me in welcoming Jill, and we will be recording this session for future reference. We look forward to our learning with you today.
Thank you, Pam. So, all right, now I have permission here to share. So we're going to get started. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the screen. Just a quick thumbs up. Okay. All right, so hello everyone, good afternoon. As Pam shared, I am Jill Warner, and this presentation is going to hopefully help you look at things through different lenses and from zooming in and zooming out, and not just with the Zoom platform, but we're going to talk about all sorts of different eyewear and how those help us look at things differently. So this is a selfie. This is where we're going to start. I figured that was a really good place to connect with our audience today. So I'm not the best at selfies, but this is one that I opted to take when I was on the Great Wall of China. And if you are not familiar with the Great Wall, it is steps almost the entire way, which is not the impression I ever had of the Great Wall of China. So it really, even when I got there and I, was spending all of this time getting up to the Great Wall, I was like, wow, how did all of these people many, many, many years ago do this with all of this armor and so on? And so I had to take a selfie to kind of commemorate the experience that I made it to the top. But this is just one example for me of looking at something differently once I was able to be there and touch it and be close to it. It's very different than what I had perceived through media and through movies and through just my perception of what the Great Wall would look like when I actually got there. So to keep us going, much like Alexis, I'm going to share a little bit about my journey and how I got started, because she considered herself a farm girl, right, from Wisconsin. Well, I consider myself from rural Indiana, but now I work for an organization that's based out of New York, and I really feel like in a lot of ways I've had some amazing stops in between. And also, like Alexis, it was not a linear journey. There were a lot of curves and bumps and all of those different things. So when I say I'm from a small town in Indiana, I graduated with 98 other people. We couldn't even hit the triple digits in our graduating class. And for me, something that really sparked my interest was Spanish class. Back in the day, my Spanish 2 teacher, she gave us the opportunity to sign up for a pen pal. And I was like, woohoo, a chance to interact with people that spoke the language that I was learning. Thought it was great. I paid for one pen pal. It was like $1.25 way back when. And what the Spanish teacher didn't tell me, I don't know if she didn't know or what, but when you put your information on that little card and sign up for your pen pal, they take your information and put it in a database. And so I paid for one, but I ended up with 7 more. So I had my pen pal from Spain that I wanted to interact with exactly as I'd hoped, but I also ended up with a second one from Spain, one in France, one in Germany, one in Venezuela, one in Australia, and 2 in Hong Kong. And those letter writing experiences were eye-opening for me, not only at how many people wanted to practice their English with me and connect, but just the stories that they would tell me about what life was like in their country. And then my senior year, I'd not yet had an opportunity to really travel or meet any of my pen pals, but we had a French exchange student. And granted, I was a Spanish student, and this was the French exchange student, but he was in my Spanish class. And I was mesmerized, absolutely fascinated. Just had the opportunity to talk to this kiddo, and we just completely bonded. And for me, it was the first person who was truly different. And although I had my pen pals, this one was live and in person and sitting right next to me in my Spanish class. And so his life experiences leading up to our, at that point, 17 years of life had just been so unique and so different that I was just fascinated. So that took me beyond high school. I went to a large public university in Indiana, where there were 35,000 other students. So not like my high school experience. But I had the opportunity to study abroad my junior year, and I went to Spain. And that is where I met my best friends. And I think a lot of you will appreciate this, because out of my group of 6 that I would consider us kind of besties, 2 of them are from Wisconsin. So I traveled to Appleton, and I've been to Madison before because that's where my friends are. And we met because we had this common bond. And a couple of them are Spanish teachers. And so my career track took me on a path of being a Spanish teacher. And then I decided I wanted to impact more students. I wanted to do something more. Like 180 students a year wasn't enough for me. So I became a school administrator. And then I had the opportunity to keep going and becoming that world language specialist at the Indiana Department of Education. And throughout all of that time, you're going to see that little green GPS spot there. I was volunteering for an organization that helped not just my students from the classroom and not just my students from my school, but also all of the students from the state of Indiana and beyond have an intercultural experience, both hosting exchange students, studying abroad. And I began volunteering with AFS, and I did it for, I still do it, but I did it for about 12 to 14 years. And I served on committees, helping with scholarships so that Americans could go abroad. One day I got the call asking for input on how the organization could connect better with schools. And at the time, I just thought somebody was asking for input. And so I was very blunt and very honest. And I shared all of my opinions of things I'd been thinking for a long time and never felt like I had a mechanism with which to share. So 6 months later, I was offered my dream job. I get to teach, I get to travel, and I get to help people see the value of relationships and learning from and with people who think and believe differently than they do. And all of those things get tied together with my experience from high school with the French exchange student, my experience as a Spanish teacher, all of my years as volunteering. And I think probably what I appreciate the most is that I'm still learning every day. And I get to meet new and awesome people every day, every week, and through every experience that I have. So that is my journey. So much like Alexis's, it was not linear, but it had a path. And I can't say that I'm done. I don't know when I'll know when I'm done. But this is what gives me kind of my purpose. And so my entire journey has always been kind of guided by one big quote. And you're going to see me present you with a lot of quotes, and they're all going to come from Maya Angelou, who I just really think is spot on with a lot of the things that she has to say. And so this quote about do the best you can until you know better. But then when you know better, do better, right? It's this idea that you know, nobody's perfect, right? And nobody knows everything. But when you do come across that situation and that moment where you learn something new that helps you do more or find a bigger purpose or connect with your actions in a different way, then it is our obligation from then on to do better, right? Because now we know more, so we can do more. So to jump in with our theme here, here's our first kind of visual device. So quick kind of show of hands, you can use the reactions. I'm going to give you a lot of questions that I'd really appreciate if everyone would use the chat box and use the reactions on screen. But how many of you have ever used this type of a viewing device, right? And where were you when you had the opportunity to access one of these? I'm going to pause for a second, let everyone have a chance to jump into that chat box. Right. So a park or historic space, great. Niagara Falls, the zoo, awesome. Okay. Last week, downtown in Milwaukee on a bridge. These are great tourist places. I'm seeing places like New York, LA, Chicago, Paris, awesome. Door County. I'm coming to Door County for my very first time this summer. Okay. So then my next question is, as you guys are putting all of this stuff in the chat box about where you have used one of these viewfinders before, does everyone have access to use one of these? You don't necessarily have to answer that in the chat box, but it is something I want you to think about, okay? Because we're going to talk about access multiple times as we go today. So here's my next big chat box question for you. What do you know about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? That's a big part of what we're going to be looking at today. So what do you already know? So this is probably a bigger question for the students in the group, okay? Goals to reach by 2030, great. Anything else on there? You know, there are 17, great. Thank you, Elena. Anything else you all know about the Sustainable Development Goals? You learned about them in Spanish class. Well, kudos to your Spanish teacher. That's awesome. Very happy to hear that. Life on land, life below water, perfect. They're worldwide. And yes, they are goals to make the world a better place. Perfect. So I'm going to keep us going here, okay? And I'm going to help us learn a little bit more about what these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are all about. So you're going to hear me reference these as the SDGs, short for Sustainable Development Goals, or I might call them the global goals, because just like someone mentioned in the chat already, these are global, these are worldwide, okay? Previously, these were referred to as or I should say their previous iteration was called the Millennium Development Goals, or the MDGs, okay? And the Millennium Development Goals had targets where they were really only focused on the developing countries around the world. The difference, okay, between those Millennium Development Goals that came out in the year 2000 and they went until 2015, they have now transitioned into the Sustainable Development Goals, which now apply to all countries. It doesn't matter what the development status is of a country, whether it's considered a rich, a middle, or a poor country, right? The SDGs, or the global goals from 2015 to 2030, so we're about halfway there right now, they're not just focused on those developing countries. They apply to all countries around the world. And it's not just focused on all of the world coming in to support these developing countries. They were created and they're given to the individual countries to be country-led, so that in every country, they have the freedom to establish a national framework to achieve success with these, okay? So 193 member states in the United Nations, they sat together in Brazil, and they put these together in 2012. They launched them in 2015. And the objective was to produce a set of universal goals that met the urgent environmental, political, and economic challenges that were facing the world, okay, with hope for progress by 2030, okay? Now, I don't think anyone was under the belief that in 2030, every single one of these problems would be eradicated, okay? But one thing that kind of lies below all 17 of these sustainable development goals are what we would call the 5 Ps. So for the purpose of our presentation today, I'm going to call it the 5 Ps plus 1, okay? So first I want to share what these 5 Ps are. And the first is people. And this idea of people is the idea that, you know, we're all sharing the same planet. So we want to make sure that we end poverty in whatever form it's taking, because it does take a lot of forms. And it's not just that idea that somebody doesn't have enough money to do X, Y, or Z. Poverty can take a lot of different shapes and forms, and you'll see some of those as we keep going. But the idea is we want all humans to be able to fulfill their potential with dignity and equality, and be able to do that within a healthy environment, okay? Which that leads us directly to the next one, which is planet. That healthy environment means that our planet needs to be able to support the needs, not only of all of the humans and the people on it now, but also the generations to come, right? My kids, my grandkids, your future kids, your future grandkids, right? All of these like future inhabitants of our planet, they need to be able to have a planet to have the same ability to fulfill their potential when it is their turn, okay? This idea of prosperity, and this is the idea that all human beings can enjoy this prosperous and fulfilling life, but also do so with, at the same time that economic, social, and technological progress are happening. But we've got to make sure that those aspects of progress are happening in harmony with nature, because again, we come back to planet, and we've got to make sure that we're preparing for future generations. And we come back to people to make sure that everyone can fulfill their potential in a healthy environment. So that takes us to peace. And hopefully what you're seeing so far is that everything is kind of connected when we start talking about the Ps. So when we get to peace, it's hard to think about sustainable development without peace, because how is anything sustainable when there's not peace among those who are working toward it? And in order to work toward those things, there's got to be an idea of partnership, okay? And this is that idea of strengthened global solidarity, that idea that everybody is working together to create that healthy environment so humans can reach their potential, to be part of that planet where our current and future selves and generations can, you know, be able to reach their goals and do so in a prosperous way where everyone is in a peaceful mindset with one another. So that leads me to the extra one, okay? That kind of, you've seen the 5 Ps. Now here's my plus 1, the purpose. My purpose today is to inform you, to inspire you, to motivate you. But for all of you, it's important for you to find your personal purpose. And I hope between the things that I share today and the things that you'll work on in the rest of your afternoon, that by the end of the day, you will have some sense of your purpose, because purpose is not something that someone else can give you. It's something that you have to identify on your own. And it's something that has to be connected to something that you're passionate about. For me, my purpose and what drove my journey and still drives my journey is the strong held belief that I have that every student deserves to have an experience connecting with people that are different than they are. So whether that is an intercultural experience in your local community, virtually, by going abroad, whatever it is, I believe that very strongly. That's my purpose. But you've got to find yours. So hopefully something today will help inspire your purpose so that you know how to move forward, okay? So we're going to zoom in a little bit more. not just from our viewfinder in those public and touristy settings, but this is a Zoom piece of technology that you can take with you. Okay, you can take it with you wherever you go. And so although the SDGs may feel really big and they may feel really distant, okay, especially if these are brand new for you and you've never seen or worked with them before, we're going to zoom in a little bit using our virtual binoculars today and take a look at some of them. So since you haven't seen all 17 of them before, okay, some of you may have, but I've picked about 5 today that we're really going to look at. And so the first one is zero hunger. This one, to me, I thought, okay, everyone has had a moment at some point in their life where they probably experienced a little feeling of hunger, right? Your stomach tells you that you're hungry. So my question to you is, and again, I want you to get started in the chat box here. What comes to mind when you see this image and you see those 2 words, zero hunger? What do you think about? Where does this problem exist? What is the problem? What goals do you think might be part of this that we're trying to solve? Because the idea of zero hunger is very big. So what do you think might be underneath that? Okay. You see poverty, 1 in 3 children are affected by hunger. What other comments do we have? What do you think about when you see zero hunger? Feeding America, great. Ending food deserts. All right, we've got some well-informed folks on this presentation today. Lack of proper nutrition, great. Refugees, okay. Please know I'm not saying great in that lack of proper nutrition is great. I'm saying great that you're recognizing some of these things before I say them. So that's what's great. So here's my next question. Does anybody know any of the, does this problem exist in Wisconsin? Okay. Yeah. So somebody mentioned Feeding America. Perfect. The idea of hunger, this is not just something that we have to zoom out to see in other countries around the world. Remember, the Sustainable Development Goals are something that we should be having our own country plan to work through and find our own ways to engage with this. So this is what hunger looks like in Wisconsin. And notice I'm not from Wisconsin, so I had to do a little research to get this information, but thanks to Feeding America, 1 in 7 children in Wisconsin faces hunger. Okay, that to me is a pretty impactful statistic when I think about hunger and when I think about, my local environment. So when we talk about zero hunger, the big overarching goal is this idea of ending hunger, achieving food security and improved nutrition, and promoting sustainable agriculture. Okay, what that means, food security is this idea of having at all times both your physical and economic access to sufficient food to meet dietary needs for a productive and healthy life. So a family is considered food secure when its members do not live in hunger or fear of hunger. Think about how hard it is for you to focus on, whether it's this presentation or focus on class at school, when you're hungry. And imagine if that is something that you're dealing with on a daily basis. Okay, it's hard to think about meeting other needs for a person when hunger exists, when a person or when a family is not food secure. So someone else mentioned earlier, food deserts. Okay, a food desert, for those of you who are not familiar with that term, a food desert is described as a geographic area where the people within that area do not have access within a specific kind of geographic space, usually a mile, to a supermarket where they can get fresh produce, fresh vegetables, things like that. So when there's not a grocery store or a convenience store where they could walk there, or when there's no public transportation to get them there. So usually when it's more than a mile away, if they don't own a car, it makes it really hard for them to have access to get there on a routine basis, because we know fresh fruits and vegetables don't last 3 weeks, right? They last for a few days. If we're lucky and have plenty of space in our refrigerator, they may last a week, but we've got to be able to keep that stuff. So if you're always having to travel significant distance to get those healthy foods and not prepackaged things with a lot of sodium and a lot of things that can be unhealthy, then it's said that those individuals live in what's considered a food desert. Okay? So just want to make sure everyone knows what those terms are as we keep going. So underneath each one of these sustainable development goals are what they call targets. And a target is kind of a more specific goal that gives people a little more direction on how to reach that idea of the overarching goal. So if the overarching goal is zero hunger, then this target is the idea that, so 2.1, since zero hunger is goal 2, this target is about universal access to safe and nutritious food. So what that means is by 2030, the idea to help end hunger would be to ensure access by all people, in particular, individuals who are poor or people in vulnerable situations, including infants, so that they have access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food all year round. Okay, so that's a much more measurable goal and something that has kind of action steps to it to start thinking about how do we reach this big overarching goal of zero hunger by 2030? Well, we start by following the targets because they're much more measurable and they have kind of more step-by-step actions and individual people groups that we can help to solve that goal, right? To reach the bigger goal. So here's another one, 2.3. So this one is about doubling the productivity and income of small-scale food producers. Well, first, I think we need to know what a small-scale food producer is. A small-scale food producer is, for example, a farmer or an entrepreneur that has limited opportunities and they operate under kind of bigger constraints or structures. So their access to resources, technology, and bigger markets may not be as big as it would be for other folks, right? So food producers could be farmers, they could be fishers, foresters, pastoralists, right? And small scale comes from the idea of looking at their land size, the quantity of livestock that they have, or the amount of revenue or income that they have. So when thinking of those on a smaller scale, that's who we're talking about, okay? And so this idea by 2030 is to double the agricultural productivity and incomes for these folks, in particular, women, indigenous peoples, family farmers, pastoralists, and fishers, and making sure through secure and equal access to land that they can have productive resources and inputs. They have the knowledge that they need to be successful and double this productivity. They have access to financial services that will help them do these things, markets where they can, potentially sell and reach a bigger audience for their products, and opportunities to add value to their small scale production, okay? So that's kind of what we're talking about when we start talking about doubling their productivity, right? We want them to be able to have access to more things at lower costs, access to bigger markets, okay? And all of those different pieces, and especially in particular, women, indigenous people, family farmers, and some of those other groups, okay? So these targets give us particular audiences to assist. And then 2.4, by 2030, we want to make sure that we can ensure sustainable food production and the systems that go with that, and implement resilient agriculture practices that increase that productivity and production. This means that we've got to help maintain ecosystems. We've got to strengthen capacity for adapting to different changes in the climate, extreme weather, droughts, flooding, natural disasters, any of those things. What can we do to progressively improve land and soil quality so that foods and those, farm areas can be more sustainable? And when we talk about this idea of sustainable food, what that means is referring to growing enough food to support human life without causing unnecessary harm to the environment. So food sustainability means that we're addressing the economic and nutritional concerns of food production on a global scale. So not just in our one town, but all over the world, which means we start in our towns and in our states. Okay, so this is just as an example, this is the idea that, rotating crops, presenting the depletion of nutrients, right? If you plant the same crop over and over and over again on the same land, then some of those nutrients in the soil disappear. And so we want to be able to conserve those. So that's that idea of rotating different crops so that allows us to prevent harm to animals and humans by making sure we always have healthy soil. Okay. So this is just one. We've zoomed into one of these SDGs. Now I'm going to take you to another one. This idea of good health and well-being. So I'm going to have you engage in the chat again and tell me, what do you think of when you see good health and well-being? What does that mean to you? You've seen the example of smaller goals with zero hunger. What do you think are some of the smaller goals that would contribute to creating good health and well-being for a population? Universal access to healthcare. Thank you, Gabby. Access to healthy food. Access to medical care. Great. Educate the young on reading nutrition labels. Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to share a few with you before I get to the next screen. But this is the idea of ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all at all ages. So this includes things like ending preventable deaths under 5 years of age, fighting communicable diseases, reduce mortality from non-communicable diseases through prevention and treatment, and promote mental health and well-being, health coverage for everyone, reduce illness and deaths from hazardous chemicals and pollutions, improve early warning systems for global health risks. Okay. So here's another one, reducing maternal mortality rates. So the idea here is by 2030, they want to reduce the global maternal mortality rate or ratio to less than 70 per 100,000 live births, right? So 70 per 100,000 live births. Now that seems like not a lot, but when in terms of what's actually happening around the world, what's happening locally, that may feel like a lot, right? So just to give you a Wisconsin stat to bring this home, right? To know that this does exist in, in our own country, in our own states. This is the statistic from 2018, okay, for the state of Wisconsin. Now, what it says is the maternal mortality rate increased 5% from 2016 to 2018. But keep in mind that that goal for 2030 was to have this rate be less than 70 deaths per 100,000 live births. Well, in 2018, even though it had increased 5% in Wisconsin, that means that the rate is 14.3 deaths per 100,000 live births. So well below that idea of that goal for the Sustainable Development Goals, but at the same time, that's still 14.3 deaths for every 100,000 babies. Okay, so that's 14.3 moms that don't get to see their babies grow up. And in terms of moms and babies, to me, it's heart-wrenching. even to know that there's 14 of them for 100,000 babies. So what the Wisconsin statistics shared is that one of the reasons for this, one of the challenges specific to the state of Wisconsin, was that there was a low prevalence of well baby visits, that there was a low prevalence of children with adequate health insurance, and that there was a high prevalence of excessive drinking among women. Now, there were also a lot of strengths, low percentage of low risk C-section deliveries, high immunization coverage among children, and a high prevalence of cervical cancer screening. So a lot of things that are going well and some challenges that individuals within the state could improve upon. I'm not going to show you the statistics for Indiana. You're welcome to look them up, but Wisconsin is doing much better. But it's just one of those things that when I initially was introduced to the Sustainable Development Goals, the idea of reducing maternal mortality, that did not jump on my radar as far as something that was part of good health and well-being. I thought of healthy food. I thought of different things like that. I certainly didn't think about reducing road injuries and deaths. It did not connect with me that this was part of good health and well-being until I dug in and looked at the targets. Okay. And so this idea was to cut in half the number of global deaths and injuries from road traffic accidents. Okay. So think about being a safe driver. Think about what are the things that are creating these road injuries and road deaths. What is causing that? And how can we as individuals, what can we control? What are we passionate about? What's our purpose? Is this something that we can have an impact on? As individuals, we can control when we drive and how we are safe as drivers. But what can we do to control or have an impact or influence what is happening with others? Okay. So I'm going to show you a statistic about the state of Wisconsin regarding road injuries and deaths. Okay. So one thing I would say here, these are the statistics since 2017. And you'll see just a quick set of numbers per month. For the state of Wisconsin comes from the Department of Transportation in Wisconsin, their crash records. My question to you would be, without seeing this, would you have guessed that the summer months are some of the highest for these crash rates? And why do you think that is? Because we've got these highest numbers between July and October. So why do we think that's happening in the summer months? Because before I saw this table, I thought, oh, it's going to be in the winter months. No school, more teenage drivers, more family trips, more recklessly with their peers. Hey, lots of interesting things. Summerfest. All right. I'm gonna leave you wondering a little bit about that, because if I give you all of the answers here, then there's nothing you're going to say. I'm super passionate about this and I want to dig in and get more. So gender bias, right? This idea of gender equality means that gender bias exists. So when we want to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, it means that we've got to know enough about our own social fabric and what values and devalues us, right? And this idea of gender bias devalues all of us, because it's not just a human rights issue. It's a waste of the world's human potential, right? What if half of the world had answers to solving big issues, but they weren't allowed to share their voice? So this is just another piece, another one of these big goals when we think about gender equality. It's one of the SDGs. One of the targets underneath that is ending all violence and exploitation of women and girls. Okay. To give you a very personal example of this, the idea of this one talks about including trafficking for sexual and other types of exploitation. And so when I traveled with students in Bolivia and 2 other countries, we were not allowed to take pictures of the little kids when we went to visit an orphanage. We certainly could not share any of those photos on social media. And when I ask why can we not do this? It in some ways kind of showed my ignorance, because people just looked at me and said, well, we have laws to prevent that or to keep you from doing that, because we want to make sure that people don't come to exploit our orphanages, steal our children, and take them to, kind of come. They see these kids, right? They think nobody's there to care for them. So they come, take them, and then they use them for not good purposes, right? They send them into slavery, or they sell them and do all sorts of things that we don't even want to get into, because they're scary and they're sad and they're horrific. And so this idea of not being able to use a student's picture, it forever changed how I looked at my travel experiences and how I looked at, social media. And when people post pictures of their little kids and all sorts of things without even thinking, is their profile public? Is their profile out there for anyone to take a look at? And so personal examples change how I think about different things. And I hope when you hear people's stories and the more you ask questions, the more it may change your perspective as well. Okay. And I'm going to go fairly quickly through some of these next few targets here, but this idea of unpaid care and promoting shared domestic responsibilities. Again, this comes under this idea of gender equality. Okay. And this is just an example about how we achieve this. So looking at some of the statistics related to, women being on the front lines of fighting the coronavirus, they are the ones who are doing different things in different environments. And is their care and their domestic work, is it valued? And what role are they playing in society and in caring for the next generation of children, of students, of all of the folks that are part of our future generations, okay? And equal rights to economic resources, property ownership, and financial services. How does anyone on here know in what year women were able to finally get their own credit card without a male cosigner, kind of giving them permission? It may have likely been, depending on how old your parents were, likely 1960s, there's a guess, 1970s. Okay, I'll tell you, it's in 1974. So think about your grandparents, right? Your grandparents, your grandmother would not get a credit card on her own without a man signing for her. Okay, so in 1960 or 1974, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was signed that prevented that discrimination. So think about those different things about gender equality, okay? And my last one here is about responsible consumption and production. And it's just the idea that, again, we're getting into this idea of planet, partnership, ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns, okay? So responsible management of chemicals and waste. We don't even think sometimes about the waste that's coming from, whether it's the plastic water bottles that we use or the chemicals that come out of the production of different things that are produced that we use in our daily life. Okay. Substantially reduce waste generation. You guys are going to see some things related to this later on this afternoon. And so I don't know about all of you, but when I see some of these targets, I think, oh, can I change all of this? No, I may not be able to change all of it, but I might be able to change some part of it, right? And if you don't like something, change it. And if you can't change it, then let's change our attitude and our actions about what we can do with it, okay? So we're gonna dig in and we're gonna pick one goal, right? And this is the last kind of big goal that I'm gonna talk to you about today. And it's one that I think matters to everyone who's on this call because it's the purpose of why you're here. It's about education. So I have a mentee set up So if you've never used a Menti before, you can scan it with your cell phone and use this QR code that's on your screen, or you can go to just menti.com on another browser on your computer or on your phone. You could do it in either places. And I've got a question built on there, which is asking, what keeps you from going to school? Okay, and thank you, John, for dropping that in the chat box for everyone. There's an easy link to get to it. So whatever's easier for you. What keeps you from going to school? On any given day, I want you to think in the past 3 years, what things have kept you from going to school? Okay. So as soon as you start popping in some answers, we'll start seeing them show up on this screen here. COVID regulations kept you from school, not having a ride, for transportation, vacation, sickness, bullying. Oh my, the weather. Keep going, keep going. All right, screen's gonna keep sharing as you're sharing. And if more come to you, feel free to keep dropping them in there. You're allowed to submit more than one response. Okay, if I miss the bus, health concerns, family illness, rumors. Okay, and this is anonymous, so nobody sees who's putting any of these things in here. But I want everyone to take a second and read some of these. Think about this. These are your classmates. Your classmates are saying that they didn't go to school because they didn't feel wanted. They were bullied. They were stressed. They were burnt out. They were sick. There were lockdowns. And this is just your local Wisconsin context. Okay, feel free to keep going with those. I'm not going to shut that off. Okay, but I am going to keep us going. I will say in some ways, I predicted a few of these. Okay, that you'd had illness, weather, oversleeping, missing the bus, right? Lack of transportation. Sometimes you don't go to school because the school schedules a teacher training day, okay? Now we're gonna take a second and we're gonna talk about context, right? Because when we think about the Sustainable Development Goals and each of those targets, you know, we're trying to work toward these goals as a world, as a country, as a state, as a school, as a family, as an individual. But we have to keep a couple of things in mind. What is our context? When we are looking at each of these goals, what's our context? Meaning, where and who are we in relationship to the problem that we're trying to solve, right? The next thing we have to think about is what can we control? The likelihood is that we have more control over things that are closer to us. So solving issues that are closer to home rather than abroad. So think back to that purpose, right? There's a reason that when the Millennium Development Goals were reshaped and reformed, they were put in the hands of each country because it's easier and there's a better likelihood of success and control when things are closer because the context is much more close to home. It's because we know our own context. And then we also have to think about what do we not know? When we dig into the goals and we start looking at them, it's easy to look at them through our lens, which means our life experiences that shaped us. So in order to understand that bigger picture of the issue, we may have to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and walk for a little while to truly empathize and truly understand. So I'm going to give you an example in a school context, okay? So say, for example, you have the lead in the school play, but you weren't granted a solo for the choir. Well, in the school play context, you're the top dog. But in the choir context, you may be constantly reminded that there are others who are outperforming you. They perform better than you at tryouts, and that's why you didn't get a solo. Are you any less or any more of a person? No, not at all. It's just the reality is that every individual, every school, every state, every country, every world has strengths and weaknesses. And we need to make sure that we keep those in mind. And when you look at tryouts, are they bad? No, you were successful with one and not so successful with the other. And that's okay. What's hard is if all of your friends are in the choir, will you feel a little awkward during show choir season when they're all talking about their competitions and you didn't get that solo or you didn't make the show choir team? Maybe, but that doesn't mean that they've done anything wrong, and it doesn't mean that you did either. It's simply acknowledging the fact that you're living two different life experiences, and different doesn't equal bad. It just equals different. Okay. And so this is about context. So when we start thinking about education and we start thinking about hunger and poverty and prosperity, they may look different in different contexts. So think about the media exposure that you get. Think about things that you see on TV. Do they show this idea of poverty that may be local? Or does it always show starving babies from other countries? Okay, are there starving babies in your community in the United States? Yeah, 1 in 7 children are facing hunger. We learned that already. That's a Wisconsin statistic. Okay, so be very careful when you're looking at media and the internet and all sorts of different things to think about what is the lens that is providing you that information. Okay. So this is where traveling helps to really put a lot of things in perspective for us, meeting and talking to and asking questions of people whose circumstances are different than ours. Okay. And remember to think about these 5 Ps and this idea of prosperity, ensuring that all human beings can enjoy a prosperous and fulfilling life where economic, social, and technological progress occurs in harmony with nature. Okay. Relationships, right? They're going to help us get to this place where basic life needs are met, right? And they're all tied to our attitude and how we approach things and what lens we are using to look through things. So I ask you, when we look at quality education, this big goal, are the kids in both of these situations receiving a quality education? Okay. So I'm going to send you back to that Menti. Hopefully you didn't close it out completely, but there's going to be another question that pops up on that Menti. Okay. And I want you to think about, okay, this next question. But what keeps kids from other countries from going to school? You put your list on there. Now I want you to think about context, and that their context may be different. All right, look at these answers. Danger, work, war, gun violence, not having a school nearby. Okay. Any others? I'm going to leave that open, that you all keep thinking. Okay, feel free to keep dropping them in there. You know, some folks are multitaskers and it's easier to type things in on your phone as we keep going. Okay. But you're right. Have you ever thought about the fact that in some situations, people don't go to school because they're female? Right? So think about that. In some scenarios, girls are not allowed to go to school. In some situations, girls may not have access to feminine hygiene products to take care of their personal needs each month, and therefore they don't go in public or in school. Imagine missing 5 days of school per month. Would it be hard to keep up with learning and your assignments, taking tests, right? If you miss 5 days of school per month, just because you're a girl, you miss out on that. War keeps kids from going to school. Okay. Having a disability may keep kids from going to school. In some countries, it's very difficult for kids to have a true access to education when they have significant physical or mental illnesses because their schools can't provide for their needs. Okay. What if you were married off when you were 10 or 12 or 14? Okay. Or put to work in that context. So here's a quick little video to help us look at some of these pieces that keep kids from going to school.
Well, it's time to start the show. Lost my heart and lost my soul. Now it's time that you won't know. Lost my mind and lost my goal. Not giving in. I'm not giving in. I'm not giving in. Ooh, I'm not giving in. Waste my time, which makes things worse. Lost in my love is cursed. Time to make these things feel right. Let's start this show for this time. Oh, I'm not giving it. Not giving it. Never tell you no. Not giving it.
Okay. So you all named quite a few of these, and we saw them, right? But these are some of the things that keep students from around the world from going to school. They don't have access to a quality education, okay? And it's not their fault. So what is a quality education? Saw a couple of pictures a little bit ago, right? Were both of those a quality education? So we're going to dig in just a little bit. Now we have our 3D glasses, right? Because now we can see with different perspectives. And so when we dig into this global goal, the idea of by 2030, ensuring that all boys and all girls have a completely free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, which leads them to relevant and effective learning outcomes. Okay, this is something in the United States we are very lucky to have. We have free public education, okay? And you have quality, well-trained teachers who are doing just that. They are leading you toward relevant and effective learning outcomes. It's just not the situation that exists everywhere around the world. And when COVID hit, there were a lot of individuals around the world where even though they had access to education in person, as soon as things shut down and things had to go online, they lost access to education because of a lack of internet at home. Okay. So this idea of eliminating gender disparities, eliminating discrimination in education. So making sure everyone, all children, have access to all levels of education and vocational training, regardless of whether or not they're an individual with a disability, whether or not they are, an indigenous people, or whether or not they're a child in a vulnerable situation. But they should still have access to education. That another goal here is to make sure that countries can build and upgrade and have inclusive and safe schools. Think about initiatives that may be going on in your own school buildings about providing safe, nonviolent, inclusive, and effective learning environments for all. And think about the idea that these goals were put together in 2012 in Brazil from 193 countries, and they were put in action in 2015. Right? So these have been around for quite some time, and we are finally getting to a place where we're having these conversations about making sure that our schools are safe, nonviolent, inclusive places for all. For all. That means a student with a visual impairment could be part of your school environment. Okay. All right. And this one, and I applaud all of you and your teachers for being here, because this is one of the aspects of quality education. You may recognize this ring as being the Sustainable Development Goals, right? That education for sustainable development and global citizenship, and kudos to the state of Wisconsin for having a program like the Global Scholars Initiative to put all of these things together to promote this idea, okay, of making sure that students have access to learning, that the teachers have access to professional development that talks about people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. So hopefully you're starting to find your purpose, okay? And I'm just going to give you one example as I start to wrap up here. And that is, if we were to take just this idea that you all mentioned about weather and terrain being one of the prohibiting factors for getting kids to school in other countries, right? Sometimes it may even be a prohibiting factor for you. But you can see you've got a bunch of little kids, they don't even have shoes on, and they're headed to school. They've got their backpacks on, a couple are in school uniform, right? Weather can be, and geography can be, a limiting factor for kids having access to education. So severe weather conditions, rough terrain, lack of transportation, right? Whether it's just pure distance or whether it's the idea that transportation just cannot get through because of the local geography, okay? So this is a story of a guy named Mike, right? And Mike found that there are all of these, I don't know if you've ever seen one of these programs where there's bikes that you can rent. Now there's a bunch of scooters that you can rent with your phone, right? Scan, you scoot, and off you go. Well, they had a lot of these kind of bike share programs, big program in China, big program in Japan. And then eventually got to the point where even though they'd produced all these bicycles, they were not seeing the success in those programs that they had seen before. So they just stopped, which meant they had fields and buildings filled with bicycles, nothing to do with them. So that's where Mike comes in. Who's Mike? Mike is that guy, right? And Mike created a project called Let's Walk. This was his purpose. This is what he was passionate about. And he said, okay, I know that in China and Japan, they have all of these extra bikes. They're in perfect condition. But I also know that in Myanmar and in different places, they are going 2 kilometers, which is about 3 to 4 miles from home to school on a daily basis. Think about how long it takes you to walk 4 miles, right? If you're walking at a pretty adventurous pace, you could get there in an hour. So an hour walk to and from school. So Mike connected the dots, and Mike put together, and I'm going to skip his little bit for the sake of time here, but he put together a program where he gave all of those bikes to kids in those countries, okay? And you'll see in that little video of them packing up all the bikes and putting them in the trucks and making sure that kids had access to them. So we're moving into the space of like transition lenses, right? Our next type of glasses. And these are our 2-for-1. So you can be indoor and you'll see fine through your clear glasses. You may be outdoor and they turn into sunglasses. Or for some of our potential adults on the call, these are ones where your lenses have 2 different viewpoints on there. And the reason I bring up this 2-for-1 idea with our transition lenses is because this program with Let's Walk, right? Mike's purpose, Mike's plan. He calls it a circular economy. I call it the intersection and the overlap of all of the SDGs, right? So you'll see where he's reducing waste, which makes, better for the environment, right? He's bringing this bike sharing waste because it existed. So he's kind of giving a new purpose to all of these bikes by giving them and redistributing them to the children. And then now he's improving not only the quality of education that these kids now have access to, but the opportunities that they have, the productivity, and their future success in all of that. So this idea of 2 for 1, right, reminds us of when we talked about the 5 Ps and how interconnected all of them are. So I take us back to the goals. There's so much overlap and so much interconnectedness between all of the goals. So I want to make sure as you all start thinking about this afternoon, even though you're probably going to zone in on one, just like we did with quality education, with Mike's story and Mike's purpose, he may have honed in on reducing all of the waste related to these bicycles, but he absolutely improved the quality of another one when he talked about quality education, making sure students had access to that, right? So think about how many of these different goals Mike is impacting in a positive way as he implements this one project, okay? And I'm not saying that you need to go out and find a project where you can impact all 17 goals all at the same time, but be thinking about, can you get a 2 for 1 in a project that you're going to work on, okay? Because you can't use up creativity. The more you start using it, the more you're going to have. And the more you all use your creativity together, right, the more it blossoms because you'll bounce ideas off of each other and so on and so forth. So this afternoon, you're going to get ready for the work, okay? And when you're working on things as big as these sustainable development goals, right, you've got to brace yourself for what lies ahead. And I will tell you that one of the hardest things you're going to do is convincing others to join you on your mission, right? It's critical, but I just want you to put on your safety goggles and be ready for it, because you're going to encounter people who don't believe the same way you do. They're not passionate about the same things that you are, and they may not have the same sense of purpose that you do, okay? So just be ready for that as you keep going, okay? And all the world language teachers on this group will hopefully appreciate this piece of it. But these are statements, okay, that all come down to this idea that it takes time. You're going to put pieces of this puzzle together little by little, but this is how we accomplish success with the global goals. Okay, little by little, step by step, slow and steady. That's how you gain ground with the global goals. Okay, you take steps in the right direction and eventually you'll get there. So you've seen examples from all over the world, but I want you to focus in today on where you are. Okay, think about you. What's in your context? What's in your circle of control? What can you impact and what can you influence? Because nothing will work unless you do. You have to take that first step. So as we wrap up, I just want to give you one final idea, and it's this idea of activism. So this is the last thing I'm going to have you drop in the chat box, okay? What comes to mind when you see this word activism? What does it mean? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? What is activism? Okay, so just a quick pause. Standing up for what you believe in to make a change, empowering, speaking up on issues around you. Yep, keep going. Keep going. Think of activists, yes. Fighting for what you believe in, absolutely. Okay, making a difference. And what I want to leave you with this idea of activism, is that it can be both action and inaction, okay? So it doesn't have to be giant grand gestures as demonstrations and protests. It can be things like informed consumerism, where you spend your dollar, where you get your coffee, who you buy your t-shirts through, right? It can be through storytelling, through picture sharing. It can also be through silence, and it can be through non-participation. Every single one of those are behaviors that are part of activism, okay? Sometimes taking no action is making a statement, okay? Think about bullying training, right? If you see a kid bullying another kid and you do nothing, that sends a message, okay? Not a good one, but it sends a message. What message do you want to be known for, okay? So by not acting, you're sending a message about your beliefs. So I just want you to think about that. So your next steps are to be bold, right? This afternoon, be bold, think big, and aim high, because you are the generation that you don't just think about changing the world. You're the generation that knows that you can change the world. And every educator who's part of this Global Learning Summit wants to help you do it. They want to help you find your passion, and they want to help you make a plan to make a difference. So 525,600. This is the number of minutes in a year. How many of them will you spend on action and action toward improvement on the global goals? So as I told you way back in the beginning when I started, I can't give you your purpose, okay? You've got to find your purpose, but I hope you will, okay? And I hope maybe you've already started thinking about it. And your timeline for action is going to have bumps along the road, okay? But make a plan, pull some friends in, have some fun with this. Don't go at it alone, right? Bring some people in to help you. But I hope you find a project, a goal, and a direction that brings you the same level of engagement that I have found in the work that I get to do and that I get to be passionate about. And I'm convinced of this, just like Maya Angelou, that good done anywhere is good done everywhere. There's a reason the global goals start locally, okay? So I'm signing off, but just a quick piece about bringing the world to your home, going and exploring the world, becoming a volunteer, okay? Lots of different opportunities for you. And I know we're just a couple minutes over time. And just to make sure that if you have questions, you can all reach out to me, tweet, etc. And I do hope that all of you find your passion and your purpose this afternoon.
Jill, thank you so much for a wonderful keynote, and we really